quiet moments before a great storm, there is often a stillness that defines the atmosphere of a workplace. Imagine a high-rise office in a bustling metropolis within the American continent, where the hum of computers and the soft clatter of keyboards create a rhythmic, almost hypnotic background. Amidst this clinical efficiency, there are hundreds of individual stories unfolding simultaneously, each person carrying a weight of hidden anxieties, unspoken dreams, and silent struggles. To the unobservant eye, these are merely components of a machine, figures on a spreadsheet, or names on an organizational chart. But for the individual who aspires to lead with true excellence, there is a different way of seeing. There is a profound realization that leadership is not merely the management of tasks, but the stewardship of human souls. It begins with a fundamental shift in perspective. The ability to step outside of one's own skin and inhabit the world as another experiences it. The air in these professional environments is often thick with the unspoken, and it is only through the lens of empathy that the invisible becomes visible. This is where the journey of a successful leader truly deepens, not in the acquisition of power, but in the cultivation of understanding. To walk through the corridors of an organization and see not just the roles people play, but the people themselves, is the first step in a transformation that redefines what it means to be in charge. It is the art of seeing the world through eyes other than one's own, a practice that brings out the very best in human nature. When a person feels truly seen, understood, and valued, the dynamic of an entire room changes. The coldness of corporate demand melts into the warmth of mutual respect. This narrative explores the invisible bridge between two minds, the silent language of the heart that bridges the gap between a superior and a subordinate, a provider and a client, or a partner and a peer. It is a story of how empathy, often dismissed as a soft skill, is in fact the most resilient and powerful tool in a leader's arsenal. As the day unfolds in our imagined office, a tension begins to rise, a subtle friction between the goals of the organization and the well-being of those who serve it. This is where the first flicker of curiosity begins. What happens when a leader stops looking at the metrics and starts looking at the person behind them? The answer lies in the subtle shift of the gaze, an invitation to enter a world that is not one's own, and the courage to stay there long enough to understand it. Expanding the horizon of leadership requires an understanding of the broader landscape, the temporal and geographical contexts that shape how we interact. Whether in the frantic pace of an Asian financial hub, the structured environments of Europe, or the diverse markets of Latin America, the fundamental human need remains the same. The desire to be understood. The history of leadership has often been told as a chronicle of command and control, of great figures who moved pieces on a chessboard without regard for the feelings of the pieces themselves. However, the modern world demands a different foundation. The complexity of today's challenges, the rapid shifts in technology, the global interconnectedness, and the mounting pressures of productivity has created a landscape where the old models are fracturing. In this vast and often impersonal world, the leader who masters the art of empathy creates a sanctuary of meaning. This context is not just about the physical space of an office. It is about the emotional geography of the team. A leader must navigate the diverse terrains of different temperaments, cultural backgrounds, and personal histories. Imagine the broad landscape of the service industry in England or the industrial sectors in the American continent. In every one of these settings, the success of the collective depends on the strength of the individual connections. The foundation of this narrative is built upon the idea that the world is a tapestry of perspectives, and a leader is the one who learns to appreciate the texture of every thread. Without this grounding, leadership is a hollow exercise, a house built on sand that collapses when the winds of crisis blow. The central question that begins to emerge from this vast landscape is simple yet profound. Can a leader truly achieve greatness if they remain isolated within the fortress of their own ego? The tension lies in the struggle between the self-centered drive for results and the other-centered practice of compassion. It is the friction between the I and the we. As we look closer at the interactions within our narrative setting, we see the first signs of this struggle. A manager is faced with a deadline that seems impossible, and a team member is showing signs of exhaustion. The broader world demands the deadline be met, but the immediate world of the human heart demands something else entirely. This is the foundation upon occupied by every leader, the place where the pressure of the world meets the fragility of the human spirit. How one navigates this space defines their path. In the heart of this narrative, we find the figures who represent the different facets of the human experience. There is the leader, often characterized by a relentless focus on the horizon, a person whose thoughts, actions, and words have been honed over a lifetime to reach this very position. Then there are the others, the team members, the clients, the suppliers, each carrying their own set of emotions, moods, and needs. Among these, we might encounter a dedicated professional whose productivity has suddenly dipped, or a long-term supplier whose responses have become strained. The central conflict of this story is not a battle between enemies, but a struggle for connection. It is the internal tension within the leader who must decide whether to lead with an iron hand or an open heart. This philosophical concept of the emotional quotient, or EQ, becomes a living, breathing character in the story. It is composed of 4 pillars: self-awareness, self-control, empathy, and social interaction. Our protagonist, the aspiring leader, must first look inward to the mirror of self-awareness. Only by understanding their own triggers, their own fears, and their own motivations can they hope to bridge the gap to another. The conflict arises when the pressure of the role demands speed, but empathy demands time. It is a slow process to listen, to observe, and to truly feel what another is feeling. There is a specific moment where this conflict becomes tangible, a meeting where a subordinate struggles to articulate a problem, and the leader feels the urge to interrupt, to correct, to push forward. The small development that begins to move our story is the leader's choice to pause. Instead of a sharp critique, there is a moment of silence. Instead of a directive, there is a question. Tell me how this feels for you. This simple shift marks the beginning of the movement from a cold, indifferent leadership to one that is vibrant and connected. The stakes are subtly raised here. It is no longer just about the project at hand, but about the very soul of the relationship. Will the leader choose the path of least resistance, the path of cold authority, or will they venture into the complex, sometimes messy territory of human emotion? The introduction of this choice sets the narrative in motion, as we begin to see that every interaction is a crossroads between being a manager and being a leader. As the narrative progresses, the stakes begin to rise, and the momentum of the story shifts into a higher gear. The initial choice to be empathetic is not a one-time event, but a continuous discipline that is tested by the realities of the professional world. The friction becomes more pronounced as the leader attempts to balance the needs of various stakeholders. Empathy is not reserved solely for those who report to the leader. It must extend to the clients who face their own daunting challenges and the suppliers who are part of the broader ecosystem of success. Imagine a scenario where a major client in Latin America is facing a crisis that threatens their partnership. The natural instinct might be to protect one's own interests, to double down on contracts and legalities. But the rising tension in our story comes from the choice to see the client's panic as a human experience. To understand their problems as if they were one's own allows for a partnership built on a bedrock of mutual understanding rather than just a transaction. Meanwhile, internal pressures mount. the team is feeling the strain of a heavy workload. Early friction appears when a key member of the group, someone usually reliable, fails to meet a crucial deadline. The stakes are now emotional and conceptual. If the leader reacts with indifference or anger, the fragile trust that has been built begins to crumble. The conceptual stake is the definition of success itself. Is it merely the completion of a task, or is it the resilience of the team? The narrative momentum builds as the leader navigates these multiple fronts. There is a sense of mounting pressure, like water behind a dam. The leader must choose whether to allow that pressure to break the team or to channel it into a deeper understanding. This phase of the story is marked by a series of small but significant tests. A conversation with a supplier reveals their own struggles with supply chains in Europe, and the leader must decide whether to be a demanding customer or a collaborative partner. Each decision adds a layer to the leader's character, revealing whether their empathy is a mere tactic or a genuine transformation of the heart. The momentum propels us toward a deeper exploration of what it means to be emotionally intelligent in a world that often rewards the opposite. The air is charged with the anticipation of how these choices will accumulate, leading toward a moment where the leader's resolve will be tested in the most challenging of circumstances. The narrative now dives deeper into the emotional texture of the journey, where the abstract concept of empathy becomes a vivid, daily reality. Development occurs not through grand speeches, but in the quiet, often overlooked scenes of daily life. The leader begins to practice the 4 key factors of emotional intelligence with a newfound intensity. Self-awareness becomes a constant companion, a silent dialogue where the leader questions their own reactions before they are voiced. When a wave of frustration rises, self-control acts as the anchor, preventing a sharp word from damaging a spirit. This is the development of the inner leader. The exploration of empathy moves from being a concept to being a sensory experience. It is the ability to notice the subtle slump in a colleague's shoulders, the hesitant tone in a client's voice, or the forced smile of a supplier. These are the symbols of the human condition that the leader learns to read like a master musician reads a score. The dialogue in this phase of the retelling is rich with active listening. The leader learns that to put oneself in another's shoes, one must first be willing to take off their own. There is a thematic resonance here. The idea that true understanding is a form of hospitality, making room in one's own mind for the experiences of another. We see a scene where the leader sits with a frustrated sales team after losing a major account. Instead of analyzing the failure, the leader simply acknowledges the frustration. They give the team space to lament, to breathe, and to be human. This is not a waste of time. It is an investment in the emotional capital of the organization. The pacing of the story slows down here, mirroring the patience required for empathy. There is a subtle shift in the tone of the office. It becomes more resonant, more grounded. People start to speak more openly because they know their words will land on fertile soil. The realization that begins to dawn on the leader is that empathy does not make them weak, it makes them insightful. By understanding the why behind people's actions, the hidden fears, the secret hopes, the leader gains a far more accurate map of the reality they are navigating. This deep exploration prepares the ground for the complications to come, as the leader realizes that empathy is not just about the good times, but is most critical when the world seems to be falling apart. The beat of realization at the end of this part is the understanding that empathy is a choice that must be made again and again, especially when it is most difficult. The narrative now enters a phase of complication, where the idealism of empathy is tested by the harsh realities of conflict and contradiction. It is one thing to be empathetic when things are going well, but it is another entirely when the organization is under siege. A new layer of challenge emerges, a significant internal crisis. Perhaps a key employee is poached by a competitor, leaving the remaining team members to pick up the slack while dealing with feelings of betrayal and exhaustion. The leader's commitment to empathy is pushed to its limit. How do you show compassion to those who are overworking because someone else left? The complication lies in the contradiction of leadership, the need to be rigorous and results-oriented while remaining deeply human. This is the moment where the cold and indifferent leader of the past would simply demand more output, but our protagonist is being tested. They must navigate the fine line between pushing the team to succeed and acknowledging their fatigue. Tension builds as the leader faces the reality that empathy can sometimes feel like a burden. It takes emotional energy to hold space for everyone's stress, especially when the leader's own stress is mounting. The narrative explores this deepening conflict. Can one remain empathetic when they are themselves running on empty? This is the test of the third pillar of emotional intelligence. Empathy not just as a feeling, but as a discipline. We see the leader challenged by a situation where a team member fails to deliver a project on time, and the consequences are severe. The impulse is to react with the weight of authority, but the commitment to seeing through the other's eyes requires a different approach. The complication is further layered by the external world. Perhaps a tragedy occurs in the broader community, affecting the morale of everyone in the office. This is the moment of unresolved tension that propels the narrative toward its peak. The leader is standing at the center of a storm, with pressure coming from every direction. The expectations of the board, the frustration of the team, and the personal exhaustion of the leader all collide. The question is no longer just about how to be empathetic, but whether empathy is enough to navigate through a true disaster. The narrative reaches a point of high friction, where the old ways of leading and the new path of empathy are in direct confrontation, setting the stage for a moment of inevitable pressure. The approach to the climax is marked by an increase in intensity and a sharpening of focus. The narrative pacing quickens as the stakes become undeniable. We move away from the daily office life and into a moment of profound significance. The weight of the situation is heavy, almost palpable. In this phase, we see the leader preparing for what could be the most defining moment of their tenure. The pressure is mounting as a situation of extreme difficulty unfolds, something akin to a major organizational failure or a broader societal crisis that touches the lives of everyone in the team. The focus narrows down to the emotional weight of leadership during a tragedy. Imagine a scenario where a community in Oceania or a workplace in England is reeling from a sudden, shocking event. The leader's role is no longer about managing tasks. It is about providing a lighthouse in a storm. The sense of inevitability builds as we see that the leader cannot avoid this confrontation with pain. Every detail matters: the way the leader walks into a room, the silence they hold, the look in their eyes. The meaning that is crystallizing is that leadership is a form of presence. To be empathetic in this moment is to bear witness to the suffering of others. The intensity builds because there is no roadmap for this. There is no manual that explains exactly what to say when people are grieving or afraid. The pressure is not just to do the right thing, but to be the right person. The leader must transcend their own role and connect on a purely human level. We see the leader preparing to address the team or the families affected, and the internal struggle is at its peak. The fear of saying the wrong thing, of being seen as insincere, or of being overwhelmed by the emotion of it all, is a heavy burden. But there is also a sense of purpose. The leader realizes that this is why all the previous steps, the self-awareness, the self-control, the practice of seeing through others' eyes, were necessary. They were the training ground for this moment. The approach to the climax is a journey into the heart of compassion. where the leader must decide to step fully into the shoes of those who are suffering, regardless of the personal cost. The sense of mounting pressure reaches its zenith, and the narrative moves toward the moment where the leader must act, where the theory of empathy meets the practice of profound human connection. The climax of the narrative unfolds in a sequence of raw, emotional intensity. It is the moment where the leader stands before those who are hurting, not as a superior, but as a fellow human being. Recreating the essence of a leader standing in solidarity with the grieving, we see the protagonist in a setting where a tragedy has occurred, perhaps a disaster that has shaken the foundation of the community in the American continent or a region in the Southern Hemisphere. In this pivotal moment, the leader does not offer platitudes or focus on the technicalities of recovery. Instead, they offer their presence. They listen to the stories of loss. They look into the eyes of the brokenhearted. They allow themselves to be moved. This is the most dramatic turning point. The leader's vulnerability becomes their greatest strength. In this sequence, the traditional barriers of hierarchy dissolve. The leader's actions, staying close to those in pain, dedicating time to just be with them, acknowledging the depth of the tragedy, demonstrate a level of empathy that goes beyond professional duty. This is the conceptual turning point where the story redefines success. Success is no longer about a quarterly result. It is about the ability to hold a community together through compassion. The emotional peak is reached when the leader speaks, not with the voice of authority, but with the voice of understanding. The words are simple, acknowledging the pain, the anger, and the confusion. This is the moment of revelation. That empathy is not a strategy, but a fundamental way of being. The transformation is profound. The team, the community, and the leader themselves are all changed by this encounter. The air in the narrative seems to clear, the high tension of the previous moments giving way to a shared sense of humanity. The climax is not a triumph of power, but a triumph of connection. It is the realization that by truly seeing the world through the eyes of the suffering, the leader has found the key to inspiring and motivating them far more deeply than any directive ever could. The story transitions into a state of clarity. The path forward is no longer obscured by the ego of the leader, but is lit by the collective strength of a group that feels truly understood. The transformation is complete, as the leader moves from being a figurehead to being a true beacon of hope and understanding in a world that desperately needs both. In the wake of the climax, the story enters a period of quiet but powerful transition. The leader, having stood in solidarity with those who suffered, now carries the weight of that experience forward. This is the phase of integration, the moment where the emotional revelation begins to take root and reshape the very structure of how the leader thinks, speaks, and acts. The raw intensity of the climax does not simply fade. It transforms into a steady, purposeful energy that begins to influence every decision. The narrative follows the leader as they return to the daily rhythm of their role, but nothing feels quite the same. The meetings, the conversations, the planning sessions, all of these familiar rituals are now filtered through a new lens. The leader begins to notice things that were previously invisible. The hesitation in a team member's voice, the tension carried in someone's posture, the unspoken fear behind a simple question. Empathy, once an abstract ideal, is now a living practice. This phase of integration is not without its friction. Old habits push back. The pressure of performance metrics, deadlines, and organizational expectations does not disappear. In fact, this is where the real test begins, not in a moment of crisis, but in the ordinary, relentless demands of professional life. The leader must now find a way to honor both the human and the institutional, to hold compassion and accountability in the same hand without dropping either. The story illustrates this tension through a series of smaller, intimate moments. A one-on-one conversation, where the leader chooses to listen rather than direct. A team debrief where vulnerability is met with curiosity instead of criticism. Each of these moments, though quiet, represents a seismic internal shift. The leader is learning that empathy is not reserved for extraordinary circumstances. It is a discipline, practiced in the mundane, that shapes everything. The transformation, once sparked at the peak of the climax, is now being woven into the fabric of everyday leadership, preparing the ground for the lasting resolution that lies just ahead. As the story moves toward its resolution, we witness the deeper, more lasting consequences of the transformation. The resolution is not a return to the old, normal, but the establishment of a new, more resilient way of operating. The lesson of empathy begins to permeate every aspect of the leader's role, particularly in the most difficult tasks. We see how this new mindset changes the way the leader handles hard conversations. When a critique is necessary, it is no longer a sharp blow but a constructive dialogue. The leader gives feedback in private, maintaining their own emotional control and giving the other person the dignity of time and space to respond. This is a crucial resolution, the realization that one can be both rigorous and empathetic. The most difficult transformation is seen in the ultimate act of leadership, letting someone go. The narrative portrays this not as a cold transaction, but as a moment of profound empathy. The leader provides advance notice, offers genuine support, and ensures the best possible transition. The internal and external shift is complete. The leader is now recognized not just for their skill, but for their humanity. This resolution brings a sense of emotional settling to the team. There is less fear and more trust. People are more willing to take risks because they know that if they fail, they will be met with understanding rather than judgment. The broader consequence is a more stable and committed organization. The transition toward closure is seamless, as the various threads of the story, the internal struggle, the external crisis, the interpersonal conflicts, all find their place within the framework of emotional intelligence. The leader has learned that self-awareness and self-control are the precursors to empathy, and that empathy is the key to meaningful social interaction. The transformation is reflected in the eyes of the team, who now see a leader they not only follow but admire. The resolution is a state of equilibrium, where the demands of the professional world and the needs of the human heart are in a dynamic, healthy balance. The narrative prepares the listener for the final synthesis, showing that the journey of a leader is a continuous process of growth, and that the shoes they have learned to step into have expanded their own world beyond anything they could have imagined at the start. The synthesis of this narrative journey brings together the key threads of leadership, empathy, and emotional intelligence into a coherent reflection. The broader thematic significance becomes clear. Leadership is essentially a relationship, and like any relationship, its health depends on the quality of understanding. We look back at the journey, from the initial shift in perspective to the testing of empathy in the fires of crisis, and see a pattern of growth. The philosophical significance lies in the idea that to lead others effectively, one must first be able to lead oneself. The four pillars of EQ, self-awareness, self-control, empathy, and social interaction, are revealed not as separate skills, but as an integrated system of being. The narrative synthesizes the idea that empathy is a choice, a discipline that can be learned and perfected through practice. It is the catalyst that transforms a group of individuals into a cohesive team, a transaction into a partnership, and a manager into a leader. The reflection deepens as we consider the impact of an empathetic leader on the broader world. Whether in the home region or across continents, the presence of leaders who can see through the eyes of others is the antidote to the coldness and indifference that often plague modern institutions. The story has shown that empathy is not a sign of weakness, but a mark of courage. the courage to feel, the courage to listen, and the courage to act with compassion even when it is inconvenient. The resonant idea that prepares the listener for the final message is that our thoughts, actions, and words throughout our lives are a preparation for the leaders we become. We are all leaders in some capacity, in our families, our communities, or our workplaces, and the tool of empathy is available to us all. The synthesis draws a line from the internal mirror of self-awareness to the outward window of empathy, showing that the two are inextricably linked. The journey of the leader in our story is a mirror for the listener's own potential journey. It is an invitation to consider how they might grow by simply choosing to see the world differently. The reflection concludes that the most successful leaders are those who realize that the most important work they do is not what they build with their hands, but what they build in the hearts of those they lead. The final moments of our narrative bring us to a closing reflection, a quiet and emotionally satisfying summary of the journey we have taken. The essence of the story is distilled into a single, enduring truth. The power of a leader is measured by the depth of their understanding. We leave the world of offices, crises, and boardroom meetings with a sense of clarity. The legacy of a truly successful leader is not written in the profits they generated or the titles they held, but in the lives they touched and the people they inspired to be better versions of themselves. The closing insight is a reminder that everyone is waiting for a leader they can admire and learn from, someone who sees them as they are and understands where they want to go. The emotional resonance of the final moments is one of hope and empowerment. The listener is left with the realization that they, too, possess the tools to become an extraordinary leader. By cultivating the habits of self-awareness and self-control, and by choosing the path of empathy, they can transform any environment they inhabit. The philosophical tone of the conclusion emphasizes that leadership is an art of the heart as much as the mind. It is about the courage to be human in a world that often demands we be machines. The final message is a quiet call to action, not a demand for grand gestures, but an encouragement to practice the small, daily acts of empathy that build a life of significance. We are reminded that to truly understand another person is to offer them one of the greatest gifts one human can give to another. As the narrative ends, the listener is left contemplating the eyes through which they will see the world tomorrow. The journey of leadership never truly ends. It is a continuous unfolding of understanding, a constant effort to see further and feel more deeply. The closing reflection leaves us with the image of a world transformed, one person at a time, by those who are brave enough to put themselves in another's shoes. It is a world where leadership is defined by compassion, where success is synonymous with understanding, and where the most important thing a leader can do is to simply, truly see.